All right, so right now we have Javier Flores, and we have his altar for Los Seis de Boulder behind him. We're going to ask him a few questions. Okay, so how does, if it does at all, how does creating an altar align with your typical practice? Does it at all?
I've created altars in the past for different things, but more personalized altars for loved ones. We used to have an altar to the printmaking gods in the old shop in the print studio, so I kind of started that tradition as well. Of anywhere where I have a set studio, I'll do an altar. But having the opportunity to exhibit an altar, I have not had a chance to. But I do enjoy it, and I think it's a lot of fun to be able to switch gears from 2D to 3D and thinking about an all-encompassing composition in a space as opposed to on a flat surface.
Yeah. Do you think like in the future you'll does altar making influence future practice at all, or?
I think the installation aspect of it, I've done quite a few installations and they're always fun. I love the idea of site-specific installations and how you interact with the community or a specific area and you make it yours, you express yourself in that way. And so I think in that way I'll probably always be doing that. And I do want to venture a little bit more back into some installation work that I had done for a thesis in graduate school.
Yeah. And then how did you feel creating an altar for individuals that you haven't necessarily met, like historical figures, and did you still feel a connection to these individuals?
I think so. I think there was like a manifesting of those spirits, that energy of that I think that kind of resides in the world. And I'm probably going to be a little bit new age here, but I think it's really important. I think it's that those things that connect us to our legacy and connect us to our traditions, to our culture. And as I was doing the research about Los Seis, it just struck me as one of the most heartbreaking things that a family could have gone through, and thinking about it from their family's perspective of what would it be like if you lost someone that you love dearly in explosions, and having it happen for multiple people and multiple families all at once. And I was thinking about how do you do that justice? How do you celebrate someone's life without knowing them, without being able to really conversate too much with some of the family just because of opportunities or time limits, and without that, are they going to be mad if I portray them in a certain light or use a certain image? It's really dicey ground, but I felt like ultimately I was doing something positive to honor their memory and something that would bring hopefully awareness towards what happened with them, and shed a little bit more light towards the inequalities that were happening and that continue to happen to this day.
Yeah. What are your takeaways from learning about the story of Los Seis and really researching, and why is it so important for currently to share that story?
For me, I'm a history nerd. I love history. It's one of a few talents that I'm good at, and also don't pay hard. But in general, I think history is very important. I think Americans in general have a very bad sense of memory and history. And if you ask the average person about their historical legacy, even just in their family or from this country, it's a very very concise spectrum of what time has been. Nobody really takes the time to read books about history per se on a general basis. I know there are a lot of people like myself that are very much history enthusiasts, but I think it's a way to recall things past tragedies that have happened, how they happened, why they happened, and how do we hold people that create these tragedies responsible? How do we have more ownership over our communities and make people feel safe for expressing themselves and their ideas, as opposed to being scared and being intimidated through violence?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if the viewers really know, but Javier is an art educator. So, as an art educator, how do you tackle the issues that are mentioned, like in this exhibition? Things like racism and social inequality and reform. I mean, like, how do you handle talking to your students about things like that?
I think it kind of depends on the class, on the atmosphere, the students involved. It involves a lot of like things that you can't really control, but ultimately, I think if you come up from a place of honesty of where you stand, um, people can be mad, but they shouldn't fault you for what you believe. Um, and I feel like from my point of view, and maybe it's from my point of view, so I'm super biased, and it is super biased. But I feel like my viewpoints are very heavily researched, and part of the reason why I only delve into politics every so often in my art, because it is such strenuous information, like, and it's stressful and it's sad and it's heartbreaking, and so you have to take the time to like be courteous of other people's opinions and not just totally bash them over the head and tell them they're wrong, and not be overtly mean in the process, but coming from an educational standpoint of being like, maybe you should read this book, maybe you should watch this, maybe you should do a little bit more research on this information, and maybe you'll have a different standpoint or viewpoint on what led to this tragedy, you know. And so I think in our political world right now, with everything being so polarized, it's a topic of conversation that comes up frequently. And as an art educator that is not an associate professor, I don't have to circumnavigate those waters of being PC for people's fragile little ego. You know, like I can speak a little bit more truth to the inequities of life, and things that are just wrong and bad, and things that we should all be we should all be offended by, that we should be taken to the streets and calling for justice and trying to change things, you know. And I think that's one of the most important things of this culture and this society, and the quote unquote democracy that we have, you know, is we are allowed these rights in the Constitution to be able to do, to question, and I think that's super important in our day and age. People, I think, for a lot of times will just become blind followers, and whether you're on one side or the other, like, it's important that you do your own research, because people can tilt the truth, and even people with the best intentions can mess up things and be jaded by politics or some kind of different scenario of why they're choosing to do the things they do. So it's a fine line. That all of that was elaborating about, like, it's a fine line to try to talk about politics, but ultimately, again, I think as long as you're coming from a place of truth, that's probably the most important, and respect. Like, I think there's civility that has been lost in our society, that you can't talk to somebody that has an opposite viewpoint without instantly going to cuss words or telling them they're stupid. You know, like, I think there's an opportunity there for real dialogue, and I think that's what's being lost in a lot of cultures and a lot of sects of America, and a lot of regional sects of America. And I think everything has become so regional that if you're not on our team, you're against us, kind of thing. And it's like, no, we all want the best thing for our family, for our kids, for our country, for our world, without hurting others. And I hope that that is the case. And if it's not, then maybe we are at odds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think that's really good to hear that an art educator feels that way and
Yeah.
nourishes really just like understanding the truth and different opinions, and I think that's great.
Thank you.
All right, well, that was Javier Flores, and thank you for tuning in.
Thank you.
So right now we have Adrian Raya and Ramon Trujillo. This is their altar behind them, and we're gonna do a few questions. All right, so how did you feel creating an altar for historical figures and individuals that you haven't actually met?
Well, I feel like it was, first of all, an honor to be allowed to speak of this Longmont's history, right? I'm not part of this community necessarily, but I feel like the events that happen and the individuals involved in the events speak to a wider range of people. It speaks to the Hispanic community.
Yeah.
So it was an honor for me.
Cool.
Yeah, for me personally, like with everything being so relevant in today's time, I think that was, it was nice to be able to put my creativity into something like that instead of something that's so saturated. Not that I don't want to support BLM, but everyone's done that at this point, and everyone's, recreated those, and it's nice to bring historical figures, kind of reminding everyone that it's just, it's not new. It's been happening for a while.
Yeah.
It was a good opportunity in regards to that. It happened, what is it, 40 years?
40 years ago,
40
yeah.
years ago,
Uh-huh.
and it feels like it's a story that might have happened here recently with everything going on. And it felt like a really perfectly timed opportunity to speak to an issue that is very much still relevant, strangely, after all these years.
Yeah, 40 years is a long time.
Yeah.
And what about creating altars? Like, does altar building align with your everyday practice at all?
Yes.
It does? Or do you think that maybe moving forward, you'll kind of take on anything like this again?
It was nice to have purpose with my work. A lot of my work is just open-ended and open for interpretation, so it was just nice to be able to kind of have a concrete idea to really bounce off ideas. I don't know. We'll see what happens in the future. If opportunities present themselves, then very, very possibly so. It was nice to be able to work with something with a statement.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also don't get to work with altars, so it was, again, it had more meaning to it, so with every little thing that I was thinking about creatively, I had to be really careful with it. Whereas in my regular body of work, I'll just try to recreate like some traditional classical painting and then just slap on an element from contemporary, our culture. But with this, you have to be a lot more careful because you're speaking on behalf of somebody else, so it's not just your voice. I would not say that I would not do it again in the future. It definitely depends if the opportunity presents itself again. I would be glad to do it.
Yeah. Cool. So Adrian, I originally asked you only to do this project, but then you mentioned that it was really important to you to involve someone else. So tell me why you decided to involve Ramon for a collaboration for this exhibition.
Well, the event that you presented to me as the one that you really wanted to make sure that somebody addressed it, after reading into it and reading what actually happened on that night and how two friends basically stuck together, ultimately both lost their lives, but I felt like in order to have this project make more sense, I would need to have another person as well, a friend of mine, to join me in on this, two Hispanic young men trying to retell or revisit the history from two Hispanic young men that were unfortunately murdered at the age of 21. So I felt like it would have made it that much more meaningful, first and foremost. But also, I mean, have you looked at Ramon's work? Like, we've been meaning to collaborate. Like, I met him at MSU and the studio, the painting studio, but it was just, things were always so busy and we didn't really have the opportunity to collaborate before. And Ramon had the idea to collaborate and this came up and I was like, this is perfect. This just works. It's all in the timing,
Yeah. And then Ramon, do you feel a deeper connection to this story and this, this historical event and this project because it was a collaboration?
100%. That's a tough question. I think so, yes, because we were able to talk about it more and I was able to bounce off ideas and have someone to speak about it with. Otherwise, it would have just been an individual project and really just in my own head. And so it just allows me to connect to the story in a different way that I probably would have never really seen it from a different perspective that Adrian kind of presents to me. It's been helpful, and I think, yeah, it's kind of made it more impactful and important to me in my work.
Cool. And then as two emerging artists, do you think your practice will continue to incorporate like community-based projects, keep addressing social issues or anything like that?
I think so for sure. My work's been kind of leaning that direction anyways, and this kind of is just another project that is another step forward in that direction. Like I said earlier, a lot of my work is open-ended and left open for interpretation, which is fun for me, and I actually absolutely love doing that, but it's hard to grab a lot of people's attention doing that. I think a lot of social issues are very important. A lot of focuses that I have personally, and a lot of my art are focuses on endangered species. You know, I do a lot of animals and things like that, and so that's just something to talk to the community about and try to bring light to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so too. I mean, my focus is in the educational field, so being maybe high school teacher, art teacher, maybe middle school, I don't know, secondary. But I feel like even in that field, I already just wanted to be able to reflect or mirror the student population and the diversity within it. Because I don't know about most of us, but I didn't really see a lot of brown teachers in my schools when we first moved into the US. So I wanted to bring that in that aspect of my career. And I also paint outside of that. So I feel like what I paint is ultimately just a part of me. And if I'm trying to do this within my classroom, it'll definitely translate into whatever visuals I get to work on.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, that is Adrian and Ramon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Today we have Cal Duran. He's one of the artists for Dia de los Muertos. His altar is specifically for Jose Hilario Cortez. We're going to ask him a few questions. So as someone that has built many altars, ofrendas for various celebrations, and how do you think this exhibition is different from other Dia de los Muertos exhibitions?
I was really honored to get to hear and create a spoken word story about segregation and about the torment that people of color, farm workers, especially in Longmont, faced in the 1920s, and reflecting on how strong our ancestors were, how much courage they had to really stand up to violence against them. So that was a little bit different for me. Usually altars for me are honoring my grandmother or honoring all of my ancestor lines. So to really dive deep in and really find out his story from his great-great-granddaughter, and just really opening up this doorway to really pay homage to his story.
Cool. Well, you've done a great job.
Yeah.
So I guess that you've touched a little bit on this is like, how did you feel creating an altar for somebody that you don't necessarily know personally? Did you feel a disconnect? Like, how did you keep that connection?
I felt a little distant at first, but then reading the story more and kind of diving in and doing my research and kind of having visions of what I was going to create in my head, and also asking permission from him as a spirit and his ancestors, and also from, you know, Great Spirit and the earth, and just honoring that part of the altar.
As an artist that utilizes so many different mediums to create all of your works, how do you see those mediums directing your practice? You know, like why do you choose these certain mediums?
I choose clay as it is one of the oldest mediums on Earth, and it is from the Earth, and it just has this ability to really connect to my ancestors in that way. I feel like when I do work with clay, like they kind of come through me, and just the earth and the process, having to fire it, and using all of the elements, you know, earth, fire, air, water, to just create a whole piece. Also using paper mache, as far as my culture used it a lot, and just the many layers that you can create with it. I really like the process of that. So yeah, just connecting really deep through the mediums I have, I feel like connects me deeper to the ancestors.
Yeah. And you know, those listening might not know, but you are an art educator. So how, as an art educator, do you handle talking about things addressed in this exhibition, addressed in your altar, things like racism and social injustices and reform? I mean, like, those are tough things to talk about. Like, how do you handle talking to students about that?
Especially with children right now, just teaching them to respect one another and to also have a voice when they see something that doesn't sit well with them, or they feel anger from someone, is to speak up, have firm boundaries, but also coming from a place of love and light, but also telling them the truth that, you know, this world, this America that we live in right now has really done injustices to people of color, and that it's important to honor the ones before us and to be a voice for them when they didn't have a chance.
Cool. Good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's Cal Duran. Thank you.
Thank you.